She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You haven't been satisfying me in the other room, so I didn't want to cheat with another man." I laughed bitterly and told her, "But you're already cheating, with a machine." That was the night I stopped being a husband and started planning my revenge. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire, thick, choking, and impossible to ignore. Sarah stood there in our kitchen, still wearing that floral nightgown I'd bought her for our anniversary 3 years ago, back when she still smiled when I came home from the road. Her arms were crossed, defensive, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. As if I was the one who'd brought shame into our marriage. "Wilson, you have to understand," she started, but I held up my hand. My calloused, road-worn hand that had gripped steering wheels for 18 hours straight, that had loaded and unloaded cargo in 100-degree heat, that had once made her tremble with desire. "No, Sarah. I understand perfectly." My voice was quieter than I expected, steadier than the rage building in my chest deserved. "I understand that while I've been killing myself on the highways, providing for us, keeping this roof over our heads, you've been in there with your solution." Her cheeks flushed, but not with embarrassment. With defiance. "It's not like that, and you know it. You're never here, and when you are, you're so exhausted you can barely." "Barely what?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Say it, Sarah. Finish what you started." She looked away then, toward the window that faced our neighbor's yard where the Hendersons lived their perfect little life with their perfect little problems. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You can barely touch me anymore. When was the last time I felt like a woman instead of just someone sharing your bed?" The truth of it hit me like a jackknife at semi. 3 months. Maybe 4. Hell, maybe longer. The road had been demanding everything from me lately. Longer hauls, tighter deadlines, less sleep. By the time I crawled into bed beside her, I was already half dead, dreaming of nothing but 8 hours of unconsciousness before the next run. But knowing the truth and accepting the humiliation were two different things entirely. "So you bought yourself a replacement," I said. "Problem solved." "It's not a replacement, Wilson. It's just..." She struggled for words, her hands gesturing helplessly in the space between us. "I have needs. We both do. I thought if I could take care of mine, maybe there wouldn't be so much pressure on you. Maybe we could..." "Maybe we could what?" "Pretend everything's fine while you get your satisfaction from batteries and circuits." I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Only the bitter taste of a man who just learned his wife had written him off. "How long, Sarah? How long have you been choosing that thing over trying to work through this with me?" She didn't answer, but I could see it in her eyes. "Months. Maybe since Christmas, when I'd had to take that emergency run to Denver and missed our planned weekend getaway." That night, Sarah moved into the guest room. She claimed it was temporary, just until we could figure things out, but I knew better. I knew the sound of a door closing on a marriage. From my bed I could hear everything. The guest room was directly across the hall from my bedroom. The walls in our old house were thin, built back when privacy meant closing a door and trusting in common courtesy. At first I tried to ignore the sounds. Told myself it was just Sarah settling in, arranging her things, adjusting to the new space. But around midnight, when the house had gone quiet and the world outside had settled into that deep, small-town silence, I heard it. A soft mechanical hum. Low, steady, purposeful. My hands clenched the sheets as the sound continued, occasionally punctuated by Sarah's breathing, which grew heavier, more urgent. I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to my wife find pleasure with something I could never compete against. Something that didn't get tired, didn't need rest, didn't disappoint. The first night, I buried my head under a pillow and tried to block it out. The second night, I turned on the television, letting late-night infomercials drown out the sounds from across the hall. But by the third night, I realized something had shifted inside me. The humiliation was still there, sharp and fresh as an open wound, but alongside it grew something else. Something harder, more focused. Determination. I started paying attention. Not in some sick, voyeuristic way, but with the cold calculation of a man gathering intelligence. The sessions lasted roughly 20 minutes. They happened almost every night around the same time. And from the sounds that leaked through the thin walls, Sarah was finding exactly what she'd been missing with me. During the day we maintained a careful politeness. She'd ask about my routes, I'd inquire about her job at the insurance office. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a hotel, courteous but distant. But I could see the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't look at me. I'd become invisible to her as a man, as a source of desire. I was just Wilson the provider, Wilson the roommate, Wilson the functional appliance that paid the bills and mowed the lawn. That's when I made my decision. I'd spent 23 years driving truck, and if the road had taught me anything, it was this. When you're headed for a collision, you have two choices. You can slam on the brakes and hope for the best, or you can take control of the wheel and steer toward something better. I was done hoping for the best. Dr. Martinez looked like the kind of man who'd heard every embarrassing story at least twice. He was maybe 50, with graying hair and the sort of calm demeanor that probably came from years of listening to people's most private failures. His office was small but comfortable, with certificates on the wall and a framed photo of his family on the desk. "So, Wilson," he said, settling back in his chair after I'd finished explaining my situation in clinical, matter-of-fact terms. "You're dealing with fatigue-related erectile dysfunction, likely brought on by the physical demands of your job, irregular sleep patterns, and what sounds like significant stress." I nodded. "That about covers it. The good news is this is more common than you might think, especially in your profession. Long-haul drivers face unique challenges when it comes to maintaining their physical health and intimate relationships. The bad news is it's not something that fixes itself overnight." "I'm not looking for overnight," I said. "I'm looking for comprehensive." He raised an eyebrow. "Comprehensive. I want to understand everything that's wrong and everything I can do to fix it. Diet, exercise, medication, therapy, whatever it takes. I want to be better than I was before this started." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, intrigued. "Before what started?" I met his gaze directly. "Before I became someone my wife doesn't want to touch." He nodded slowly. "I see. Well, let's start with some tests and go from there." The next month was a revelation. Blood work showed my testosterone was in the basement, my vitamin D levels were practically non-existent, and my cardiovascular health was heading toward dangerous territory. 23 years of truck stop food, irregular sleep, and minimal physical activity had turned my body into a machine that was breaking down from the inside out. Dr. Martinez prescribed testosterone replacement therapy, along with a carefully monitored medication regimen to address the erectile dysfunction. But more importantly, he connected me with Dr. Patricia Reeves, a therapist who specialized in relationship and intimacy issues. "The physical problems are addressable," Dr. Reeves explained during our first session. "But there's usually an emotional component as well. When a man struggles with performance issues, it often creates a cycle of anxiety that makes the problem worse." She was right. I'd been so focused on my physical exhaustion that I'd ignored the mental toll. Every time I'd approached Sarah in recent months, I'd been bracing for disappointment, mine and hers. That anticipation of failure had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's what neither doctor understood. I wasn't just trying to fix a medical problem. I was orchestrating a resurrection. I started working out at a 24-hour gym near one of my regular stops in Tennessee. Nothing fancy, just basic weights and cardio. The first week nearly killed me. My body, accustomed to the sedentary lifestyle of the road, rebelled against every squat, every push-up, every minute on the treadmill. But I pushed through, driven by the memory of those sounds from across the hall. I changed my diet completely. Out went the fast food and truck stop hot dogs, replaced by meal prep containers filled with lean protein, vegetables, and complex carbs. I started carrying a cooler in the cab, eating real food instead of convenience store garbage. The sleep was harder to fix. The trucking schedule didn't allow for perfect sleep hygiene, but I invested in blackout curtains for the sleeper berth and started taking melatonin to help regulate my circadian rhythm. I also began saying no to the longer hauls that would have meant 36 hours straight behind the wheel. At home, I was careful to hide my transformation. I worked out early in the morning before Sarah woke up, or late at night when she was already in the guest room. I told her the dietary changes were just an attempt to feel less sluggish on the road, nothing more ambitious than that. She seemed pleased if distracted. "It's good that you're taking care of yourself," she said one morning over coffee, not looking up from her phone. "You've seemed, I don't know, more energetic lately." If she only knew. The changes weren't just physical. Dr. Reeves had been working with me on confidence, communication, and what she called reclaiming my masculine energy. It sounds like New Age nonsense when you write it down, but the sessions were practical, focused. We talked about presence, about the difference between being tired and being defeated, about how a man carries himself when he knows his worth. Confidence, she told me during one session, isn't about never failing. It's about knowing you can handle whatever comes next. By month 3 I was a different man. 25 pounds lighter, with muscle definition I hadn't seen since my 20s. My energy levels were steady throughout the day, and the medication was working exactly as prescribed. But more than that, I felt like myself again, like the man who'd swept Sarah off her feet 12 years ago, who'd made her laugh and gasp and cling to him like he was everything she'd ever wanted. The man she'd forgotten I could be. At home, Sarah remained oblivious to the scope of my transformation. She noticed I was sleeping better, eating differently, but attributed it to middle-age health consciousness. Every night, she still retreated to the guest room. Every night, I still heard that mechanical hum and her responding moans. But now, instead of feeling defeated, I felt patient. Like a hunter who'd spent months preparing for the perfect shot. The opportunity came on a Friday evening in early October. Sarah had mentioned that her sister was getting divorced and needed someone to talk to, so she'd be on the phone for most of the evening. I just returned from a 4-day run to Portland, but instead of the usual bone-deep exhaustion, I felt energized, alert. I showered, shaved, and put on the cologne she used to say made her want to tear my clothes off. Then I waited. Around 10 o'clock, I heard her finishing her phone call. The house went quiet as she moved through her nighttime routine, brushing teeth, washing face, changing into that same floral nightgown that had become a symbol of everything we'd lost. I gave her 15 minutes to settle in the guest room before I knocked on the door. "Sarah? Can we talk?" There was a pause. "Wilson, I'm tired. Can it wait until morning?" "It's waited long enough." Another pause, longer this time. Then footsteps and the door opening just wide enough for her to look out. She was prepared for another awkward conversation about our relationship, maybe another attempt to negotiate some kind of schedule for intimacy that would satisfy her sense of fairness. She wasn't prepared for the man standing in the hallway. I watched her eyes widen as she took in the changes, the way my shoulders filled out the t-shirt, the definition in my arms, the way I stood with my weight balanced and centered instead of slouching with exhaustion. "My God," she whispered. "Wilson, you look different." I smiled, and even that felt different, confident, knowing, patient. "I've been working on myself. Taking care of some things I should have addressed months ago." She opened the door wider, unconsciously, her gaze traveling from my face down to my chest, my arms, my hands. "You. When did you? I mean, I noticed you were eating better, but I didn't realize." "There's a lot you haven't realized," I said, stepping closer. Close enough that she could smell the cologne, could feel the energy radiating from my transformed body. "Can I come in?" She nodded, stepping back to let me enter the guest room. It was smaller than our master bedroom, with just a double bed and a nightstand. On the nightstand, partially hidden beneath a hand towel, was her solution. Her replacement for me. I gestured toward it. "How's your friend been treating you?" Sarah's cheeks flushed deep red. "Wilson, please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't mention the thing you chose over working through our problems together." I moved closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Don't acknowledge that while I was killing myself on the road, you were in here finding out what satisfaction felt like again." "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice small. "You were so tired all the time and I was so lonely, and I thought if I could just take care of it myself, maybe the pressure would be off both of us." "The pressure," I repeated. "Is that what I was? Pressure?" She couldn't answer, couldn't look away from my eyes. I could see the confusion there, the shock of seeing me transformed, the growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted between us. "I want to show you something," I said, taking her hands in mine. They were shaking. "I want to show you what happens when a man decides to become who he's supposed to be instead of accepting who he thinks he has to be." What happened next was everything I'd imagined during those months of transformation, and more than Sarah had experienced in the entire time we'd been having problems. I was present in a way I hadn't been in years, focused, energetic, attentive to every sound she made, every movement of her body, every gasp and shudder and breathless plea for more. The mechanical hum from her nightstand remained silent. Afterward, as she lay in my arms trembling with satisfaction and something that looked like shock, I stroked her hair and waited for her to speak. "I can't believe." She started, then stopped. Started again. "Wilson, what happened to you? How did you?" "I decided I was tired of being someone you didn't want," I said simply. "So I became someone you couldn't resist." She pulled back to look at me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have talked to you instead of giving up. I should have." "You should have what?" I asked. "Waited patiently while I figured out that I was killing myself in our marriage with neglect. You did what you thought you had to do. Just like I did." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what I'd said. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the night you told me I wasn't satisfying you." "And you're not angry? You're not going to leave me?" I considered the question seriously. For months, I'd imagined this moment as pure revenge, a chance to prove her wrong and then walk away, leaving her to regret underestimating me. But lying there with her in my arms, feeling her body still responding to my touch, I realized something had shifted during my transformation. I'd become a man who didn't need revenge because I'd already won everything that mattered. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "But things are going to be different now." "Different how?" I smiled, running my fingers along her arm, feeling her shiver in response. "You spent months learning what it felt like to be satisfied again. Now you get to remember what it feels like to be wanted by a man who knows his worth." Over the following weeks, Sarah moved back into our bedroom. The guest room returned to its original purpose, a place for the occasional visiting relative, nothing more. The mechanical device from her nightstand disappeared, and she never mentioned it again. But I knew it was still in the house somewhere. Probably in a box in the back of her closet, gathering dust like a reminder of the time when she'd given up on us. On me. Sometimes, late at night when she was sleeping peacefully beside me, I would think about that machine and smile. It had served its purpose in a way. It had shown me what I was competing against. Not another man, but the idea of effortless satisfaction. The promise that need could be met without risk, without vulnerability, without the messy complications of human connection. But here's what Sarah had learned and what I'd known all along. Machines don't hold you afterward. They don't stroke your hair or whisper your name or make you feel like the most desirable woman in the world. They don't transform themselves for you, don't fight for you, don't choose you again and again despite every reason to give up. They just hum quietly in the darkness until the batteries die. 3 months after that Friday night in October, Sarah and I were having coffee on a Sunday morning when she brought up the subject one final time. "I need you to know something," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Before you changed, before you became this version of yourself, I thought about leaving. I thought about divorce." I nodded. "I know. You're not surprised? Sarah, I could hear you across the hall every night. You think I didn't know what that meant? You were checking out of our marriage one battery charge at a time." She flinched. "That's a terrible way to put it." "It's an honest way to put it." I reached across the table and took her hand. "But here's what matters. You didn't leave. And neither did I. We both fought for this marriage in our own way." "I wasn't fighting for our marriage," she said quietly. "I was just trying to survive it." "I know that too. But you stayed long enough for me to figure out how to be worth fighting for again." She looked up at me then, tears in her eyes. "I'm ashamed of what I did. Of giving up on you. On us." "Don't be ashamed," I said. "Be grateful." "Grateful?" I squeezed her hand. "That machine showed you what satisfaction could feel like again. But I'm the one who reminded you what desire feels like. What being wanted feels like. What being chosen feels like." I leaned closer, close enough that she could see the confidence in my eyes, the certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was worth. "Your little friend served its purpose, Sarah. It kept you satisfied while I learned how to make you desperate for me again." She stared at me, understanding dawning in her expression. "The sweetest revenge," I said, standing and kissing the top of her head, "isn't destroying someone who doubted you. It's becoming so undeniably irresistible that they spend the rest of their life grateful you gave them a second chance to choose you." As I walked away, I could hear her breath catch, could feel her eyes following me with that familiar hunger that had nothing to do with machines and everything to do with the man I'd chosen to become. The man who'd turned his wife's betrayal into his greatest transformation, and her satisfaction into his most complete victory.